Introducing myself. My name is Asli Gurkan. I'm a senior social development specialist at the World Bank. I have joined the World Bank in 2006, and I've actually known Vinay and Jeff for a long time. We used to work together many years ago, and great to see some old friends and old faces in this occasion. So currently I am working in the global Department for Social Development of the World Bank, based in the headquarters, and I'm specifically working on the World Bank's environmental and social framework. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the World Bank's environmental and social framework, but it has become effective in 2016, and it's really become a game changer in so many ways. So today we're not going to talk about the environmental social framework necessarily, but we're going to talk about one aspect of this framework, which is the standard on stakeholder engagement. At least that will be my part of the presentation. I will give you some key information about this stakeholder engagement and information disclosure standard of the World Bank. And within the standard, how is a stakeholder defined? What is a stakeholder engagement plan? And also some of the tips, as you wish, or some of the lessons learned about what good stakeholder engagement may look like, but as well as what are some of the costs of poor stakeholder engagement that we've seen in the World Bank funded projects, but also in development projects worldwide. And then I will hand it over to Vinay, who will walk you through particularly about the role of civil society engagement in stakeholder engagement, and in also monitoring and supporting the implementation of these stakeholder engagement plans that we now have in every project and every investment project of the bank. And then we'll close off by just giving you some information on where you can find out more if you wanted to know more about this standard in particular. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that the stakeholder engagement is its own standard right now. It's called Stakeholder Engagement and Information Disclosure. So within the standard, stakeholders in the context of a project is defined in three folds. There are three categories that the World Bank projects need to map out and identify at the start of each investment project. So the first category is called the project affected parties. And this could mean both positively affected parties as well as negatively affected parties. An example of a negatively affected party could be, for instance, a group of families or a village who needs to be displaced, right? Who needs to be resettled because of a large infrastructure project, for instance. That would be an example of a negatively affected party. But the positively affected party would be, of course, the beneficiaries, the local communities, individuals who would be affected, who would be benefiting from a project that's coming to their territory, to their zone. So that's sort of the first layer. But then there is a second layer of stakeholders that all projects need to identify and talk about, and that is called the other interested parties. And I think this one is especially important for civil society organizations because they may not be, while they may not be directly affected or benefiting from a particular project, they may be considered other interested party if they have some indirect interest or this project may be indirectly impacting their work. Some other examples could be business owners that may be in an area. And then the third one, Vinay, if you can just go back for a second. And then the third group, which is very important from a social inclusion perspective, is a group of stakeholders that are called disadvantaged and vulnerable groups. And this group may, of course, may look differently depending on the project. But what that means in the World Bank's definition is that these are groups that are either could be disproportionately impacted by the project, or that may be least likely to be able to take advantage of the benefits of the project. So that's how we define disadvantaged and vulnerable groups. And I just added some examples there for you on the slide. It could be elderly people with mobility issues, persons with disabilities, refugees and migrants, etc. Next slide, please. So the way that we are defining stakeholder engagement in our standard is that it's an inclusive process of building and maintaining constructive relationships with stakeholders on an ongoing basis throughout the project's life cycle to ensure that stakeholder views are considered in decision-making and concerns are addressed. So this may look like a pretty simple explanation or a description, but those of you who know the evolution of engagements, stakeholder engagement in the bank, would know that it's taken some time to come to this definition for us, that we mandate stakeholder engagement throughout the project cycle and not only at the preparation stage. And because this is what we had before the ESF has kicked in, when we had our safeguards policies, the mandatory aspect was that, you know, depending on the risk level of the project, you had to do maybe 1 or 2 mandatory consultations, and that was pretty much it. So this whole aspect of mandating this through the project cycle has been a new concept for us. And of course, why does the World Bank require it, especially now since the ESF has been in effect, is because there's been at least 2 decades of evidence that have shown that when stakeholder engagement is done well, it can really contribute to a successful project design and implementation. But then also it can enhance project acceptance, or what's usually referred to in the private sector as the social license to operate. And we can get into that a little bit later if there is interest. But then also we've seen that effective stakeholder engagement can help ensure that community concerns and grievances are addressed on a timely manner and managed appropriately, which can also help reduce some escalation of tensions, conflicts, and project delays. And then ultimately, it's a way to make the project's development interventions more responsive to the needs of those who need it the most. Next slide, please. So, you know, we're not going to get into too much to the details of a stakeholder engagement plan, but if you were looking for a document where the details of the stakeholder engagement process is laid out, this is where you would find it. This document is called Stakeholder Engagement Plan, and every project, every investment project is required to have a stakeholder engagement plan. Now, what I want to say is that in the last 2-3 years, our ESF is going through a sense of reform and streamlining and simplification in a way. And the way that has impacted stakeholder engagement plan is that we're not going to see a standalone document for every project anymore. Instead, in projects where they're categorized as low and moderate risk, now there's more of an encouragement to rope or integrate stakeholder engagement processes planning into other existing documents. But for the projects which does have a standalone stakeholder engagement plan, these are some of the things that you would see as the content, and I have it in the right side of the slide. And I'll just give you a couple of snapshots so as to what you could find in this document. For instance, you would see a mapping of these 3 types of stakeholders in a way that I have explained before. project affected parties, other interested parties, and vulnerable and marginalized groups. If this is a well-written plan, you would also see the feedback and the summary of consultations and engagement that has done to date as part of project preparation. You should see some budget numbers as well as the delineation of roles and responsibilities in this plan, as well as a description of grievance mechanism of the project, which is again a mandatory element of this stakeholder engagement and information disclosure policy. What's also important to note is that SEP is not a World Bank document. It's a client document. And when we say client in the World Bank, it's usually a government counterpart that is implementing the project. So this is their document. They prepare it, they disclose it in their relevant website. We also have to disclose it in the relevant World Bank documents. And it's also publicly available. So you should be able to access this document if you're looking for it. And we will show you where to find SEPs at the very end of our presentation. Next slide, please. So I mentioned at the beginning why the World Bank mandated this standard and what are some of the benefits of this stakeholder engagement. But when it's also done poorly, there's a real cost to doing poor stakeholder engagement. And when I say cost, I don't only mean sort of social costs or this cost in the sense of exclusion, but it really has a real budget and economic cost. And some of the ways that we've seen these economic costs being played out has been, for instance, having cost overruns in projects, because we have seen in many situations when there is a poor stakeholder engagement or no engagement done, the possibility of community opposing it, not accepting it, would increase. And sometimes in some cases, the communities could actively block it, try to delay it, which of course, from a perspective of a project, there's a real dollar value attached to this. And sometimes we would see these delays increasing the project cost by 20%. But there's also, it could be really project delays. Sometimes we could see project delays for years potentially in a large mega project, which may be truly bringing some opportunities to a community as a whole. And in some cases, you also see cancellations, project cancellations altogether. Even when projects are not canceled or even delayed, sometimes poor stakeholder engagement can lead to poor project design or having measures built in, which is not really responsive to the needs of the communities. I just put an example here. For instance, in a project in Peru, the project had built, highway, pedestrian, cattle crosses in places where the communities were not using it, where maybe if they had properly consulted the communities, they would know exactly where to put these highway crosses, for instance. But then also from a World Bank perspective, doing stakeholder engagement poorly has real reputational risks. For instance, we do see cases in the World Bank, about 2 or 3 cases per year, where the projects go to inspection panel. And I don't know, again, how many of you are familiar with the inspection panel, but that is the World Bank's, it's an independent accountability mechanism that looks at whether the World Bank has complied with its own standards. It's done its job properly to make sure that the obligations were followed through. And in all these cases, one of the issues that have consistently been coming up over the years is this issue of complainants saying that they were not consulted properly, or the communities that they represent were not consulted properly. Next slide, please. So on the other side of the coin is some of the lessons learned, or some of the principles, the main principles that we have seen when stakeholder engagement is done meaningfully and effectively. And I wanted to just put those out for you as a food for thought, and I hope we can discuss more because I'm sure that there are a lot of experiences in the room when it comes to what are some good principles of effective stakeholder engagement. So what we've seen from the perspective of the World Bank portfolio is that number one, a key to success is the openness and commitment and good faith from the project implementers, whether these are governments or whether these are private developers. The second factor is the early identification and rigorous mapping of stakeholders. We need to know early on and who the stakeholders are and engage early on with those stakeholders. Number three is the continued improvement of stakeholder engagement and grievance redress measures. I mentioned this continued improvement because while we may have great planning at the beginning, it's impossible to anticipate everything that will come along the way. So what's important is that our interventions really built in this adaptive management and flexibility into our planning so that when we see something, a means of engagement that's not working, we have the ability to adapt while implementation is ongoing. The fourth factor is the grievance redress. I mean that could be a whole topic in itself, but what's important there is to have multiple channels to be able to make this grievance mechanisms accessible to a diverse group of people who may be using it, including building appropriate language channels and try to bring this grievance mechanism as close to the ground, make it as easier to access as possible for people who may be using it. Number 5 and 6 are related. It's important to have dedicated staff and budgets to implement and monitor the stakeholder engagement. Again, it's not just enough to put all these big commitments and not have the needed resources to implement it. Number 7 is, by the way, I see a chat here saying that we have lost you. Can everyone hear me okay?
We can hear you fine. Yes.
You lost who?
No,
Yes, we
I
can
saw
hear you.
I saw a chat message saying that we lost you.
Yeah, Chris has said that he has lost.
I'm back. I think there was a problem.
Okay. It may
Okay,
be
good.
on your side, Chris.
Okay.
So number 7 is emphasizing trust building in our engagements. And I think this will not be a surprise to any of you who are in this call. Number 8 is working with recognized and trusted systems, but also facilitators. So what we learned is that it's not only the message that matters, but also the messenger. Who is the person engaging? That makes a big difference. And then number 9 is have staff on the ground who can have daily or at least regular interactions with affected people, because I think this gets linked to the point on 7. People go, especially when you have issues, and in environments where really openly discussing issues may not be encouraged. You want to go to the people that you feel comfortable with and that you have trust relationship with. And then number 10 is that it's important to build your stakeholder engagement around proactive communication, especially countering misinformation. I mean, I think this is probably more important than ever now that we live in an AI era, and we see that misinformation is one of the risks of having AI and technology. So this is also a very important aspect, and I also would love to hear from you more when we get into the question and answer as to how we can, maybe there are some efforts where you work where this is about countering misinformation. There are good innovative ways to do this. Next slide. So this is, I mean, there are many examples of stakeholder engagement done meaningfully in the World Bank funded projects. I just wanted to leave you with one example from our Africa region. And this is a project in Nigeria. it's a climate change and environmental and social sustainability related project. Its objective is to increase sustainable landscape management practices in targeted watersheds in northern Nigeria. What is good about this project, good practice of this project, is that the team who's been working on it was able to push along or go beyond the minimum requirements that would be more about having some sporadic consultations here and there to embed really a participatory design and implementation and monitoring of the activities, especially the implementation of watershed management plans, which was done through implementation committees that were made up of community members. Also in this project, they had equipped the community members with GPS-enabled digital cameras so that those select community members could monitor the physical progress of civil works. And then this data that would be collected would be inserted into a Google map that would be maintained by a third party that was hired under this project to do monitoring of the civil works. This project also was able to pair up or complement the use of technology with a local level engagement in multiple levels, using some of the existing systems that has worked on the ground. For instance, taking advantage of the village meetings, interactions with traditional leaders, and also bringing lots of that proactive communication aspect that I've talked about in the previous slide, sensitization through communication materials, signposts, flyers, etc. So I think this pairing of technology with local level systems is really important. It's really an important ingredient of good stakeholder engagement in many, many projects that we see. Also, this is one of those projects where they were able to put in a specific indicator on stakeholder engagement. And the indicator was about the number of integrated micro watershed management plans that were completed with community participants. So what they meant is that, after the 5 years of the project, the projects are usually implemented within a five-year cycle. One way to measure the very success of this project would be linked to whether communities were part of the implementation of the watershed management plans. Next slide, please. Now I will turn over to Vinay to talk to you about CSO engagement and SEPs. Thank you.
Thank you, Asla, for the very clear and wonderful presentation. I think by now many CSOs would be saying, "Well, that's all right, but why does it matter to us?" I think it goes to one word, and I call it opportunity. I think this whole environment and social framework and the stakeholder engagement policy of the World Bank, think of it that it applies to all the 100 countries or so which borrow from the World Bank. It applies to about 80% of more than 100 billion that the World Bank lends for investment projects. And it gives an opportunity to civil society to do one of its basic job, which is to hold the government and the World Bank accountable for what they are doing. It also helps civil society serve the communities that we all are there to serve. So we are able to serve the community by helping them engage so that they get the benefits of stakeholder engagement, which Asla described. And it helps the civil society help the communities hold the government and the World Bank accountable. As you saw, stakeholder engagement plan is a paper document which makes a number of promises. but it is grounded in the policy and legal framework of the World Bank, which generates certain rights for the stakeholders directly, project affected people directly, as well as the stakeholders, other interested in stakeholders, which includes us as civil society organizations acting in their own right. What are these rights and what are the remedies? Because these rights and remedies, there is a process. If the country level World Bank officials and the government don't deliver the promises in the stakeholder engagement plan, what can you do? And there are a number of remedies available to you and the communities which they can follow, all the way up to the inspection panel, which is the ultimate accountability judiciary, or you can call it the court, ultimate Supreme Court, where the World Bank president and the board president can be held accountable for implementing the promises in line with the World Bank policies. So you can go all the way to that Supreme Court. So what are the rights? I will highlight 4 rights that the stakeholder engagement policy and plans give you. One is right to information. That information should be not just dumped on the website and say it is yours to worry about, but it has qualifications. It should be accessible in language and form, understandable to the people. So if it is incomprehensible, you can demand that it be made comprehensible. What's the second right? Meaningful consultations, not just tokenistic consultation, which we all know happens too often, but meaningful consultation, which is that it should be, again, understandable to the people who are being consulted, and it closes the loop by saying, okay, we heard you, and here is what we can do and we cannot do. And this should all be documented and made public. That's what the policy requires them to do. So not just invite people into a meeting, and just say, okay, we consulted. That's not acceptable. There are other criteria which must be met. One of which is responsiveness. They don't have to accept everything they hear in the consultation, but they have a responsibility to document what they heard every meeting and to make it publicly available and respond what they will address, how, and what they will not address and why. So that's the second right. What is the third right? When communities have grievances, there is a grievance redress mechanism which is required. Again, they don't have to always rule in favor of the applicant or the one who is complaining, but they have a responsibility to respond and say how the grievance was handled and whether the feedback loop was closed or not. This right for grievances is not available to CSO. You cannot file a complaint, but you can go to a project affected person who has a right to file a complaint and help them. And many civil society organizations do that all the time by organizing help clinics, legal clinics, awareness raising, hand holding, all those kind of activities to help the project affected people get a satisfactory resolution or a resolution or response to their grievance. What is the fourth right? As Asla pointed out, good practice is every stakeholder plan is required to say who you can contact and how and what their contact information is, so that the big government is not anonymous to you. So the big World Bank is not anonymous to you, but there is a name and a person and an email and a telephone or information which is there. You have a right to demand that in the stakeholder engagement plan. Now, what are the remedies? One is that if the government holds reprisal, retaliates, the World Bank policy has protections to work with you to make sure that this does not happen. The other big remedy is the World Bank accountability mechanisms, which is at several levels. The Supreme Court is, by definition, the inspection panel is the Supreme Court. But before that, there are, if the first line is you can go to the World Bank country office, and there are people there, and they should help you resolve any problems you are having with the stakeholder engagement plan implementation. If they don't do that, you can go to their bosses, which are at the country director or regional vice president level. If they don't resolve the process, you can go to the dispute resolution mechanism, which has been set up by the World Bank at the corporate level. If they don't resolve it, you can go to the Supreme Court. So you have remedies which, believe me, many CSOs are utilizing. And these mechanisms are not new, they have been around for decades. And the Supreme Court of the World Bank, the inspection panel has its own program for engaging with civil society organizations. And they hold meetings so you can directly talk to them. So this is why this matters to you. And I'll be happy to add to that. Now, question is, how can you engage? What roles can you play? And I would highlight 6 roles, potential roles. Of course, you don't have to do all those 6 roles, but you can choose and combine the roles you want to play. One of the roles is facilitate the stakeholder and community engagement. We are there to amplify the community voices, we are there to help them, and that facilitation will be a positive, constructive engagement, very much welcomed by the World Bank and hopefully by the project implementing agency. You can participate in the consultations as a stakeholder. You are another interested party. You can participate and contribute that it is meaningful. You can train the stakeholders, the communities to participate. You can train other CSOs in your network to participate. You can monitor compliance with this. As I said, this is a written document which makes certain promises. You can develop a scorecard, a checklist, or a report card and monitor compliance and seek continuous improvement by pointing out to the project implementing agency during the consultations that they are not fulfilling their promise, or what is the extent to which they are fulfilling a promise. It's not a yes or no answer, but usually it is on a scale of 1 to 5. They may start at 1, but through dialogue, hopefully they can improve to 3 or 4. So monitoring is important. And this monitoring, you can collect the data from from the project beneficiaries and project affected people, from the disadvantaged and vulnerable people, break it down by demographics, including in the CSO's own views, and build it into the stakeholder engagement. And finally, you can use the data to engage with the authorities at different levels. Now, I should say that as Asla said, the stakeholder engagement plan is the project implementing agency's document. It's not World Bank promise. It is the promises made by the project implementing agency. They don't have an option. They are required to prepare and publish and do things in the plan. That's the condition of getting the World Bank loan. And if they don't, they are not in compliance, and the legal sanctions can be applied, including all the way up to the Supreme Court. The World Bank also has a responsibility to monitor and supervise the project implementing agency's performance. And if they don't, you can also go to the Supreme Court and the various remedy channels. So there are these 6 roles which potentially you could play. We could play. We are definitely, PTF is doing that. Now, just to give an example of a specific project. So there is this Zambia Refugee Host Communities Project, which is financed by the World Bank. During the design of the Stakeholder Engagement Plan, the CSOs could have participated, could have advocated, could have pushed for specific CSO roles. I don't know if they did it or not, but that's what they could have potentially done. But certainly now under the implementation, they can participate and facilitate events. Now you can see that there are 6 things which the 6 promises which this stakeholder engagement plan for this project is making. It is saying that information will be disclosed in local languages, print and digital media and social media and radio. I'm not creating this. This is what the project implementing agency has committed, promised in the document to do. Can you hold them accountable for it? Is anybody doing it in the CSO community? That's the question. They promise quarterly consultation meetings, online and in-person focus group discussions, have a comment period and minutes of the meetings. Is it being done? What is the quality of it being done? How many quarterly meetings have happened? This is important information. Who is helping the communities in those? Grievance redress mechanism. What is the data on that? How many grievances? Are people aware of it? How can they file an application? How many have accessed it? Are people happy with it? Beneficiary feedback surveys, they have promised they will do that. Have they been done? What is the data? They promised special measures to handle gender-based violence, abuse, harassment, and exploitation. What is the reality? And they said they will publish quarterly reports. And they invited the CSOs to verify. Is anybody doing that in CSO community in Zambia? These are the roles they can play in this project. But we don't know if they're being played. So what can PTF do for you? We are, for 25 years, PTF has worked with local civil society organizations. We have been doing localization way before it was invented by development community as a strategy. We have always worked with local civil society organizations in more than 50 countries, including many in Africa, with civil society organizations through small grants programs ranging from $20,000 to $40,000. We don't have offices other than in Zambia. Even that is not an office, just a representation in developing countries. You are our eyes, ears, hands, legs, and we work with you. We support you. And we have, in this particular instance, given the huge opportunity which the stakeholder engagement program offers, and given the huge importance of public participation in government programs which are financed by the international financial institutions. These are not international financial institution projects. These are government programs funded by them, but these are government programs. We want public participation. You all want public participation to be meaningful in government programs, not just in World Bank finance projects. And this will be more and more important as the development financing is shrinking and less of it will be available, and the governments and the international financial institutions will have to prioritize where that money goes. Public participation will be even more important in making sure that where this scarce money goes is for things which matter to the people. And this stakeholder engagement policy is the only policy which the international financial community has, which will enable the public to influence what the government does and what the international financial institutions does. Therefore, the PTF has launched an initiative to intensify public participation in economic growth and debt restructuring programs in developing countries. Actually, we haven't launched it yet, but this is work in progress. This initiative will leverage the policies of the World Bank, not only the World Bank, but other institutions such as the IMF as well as the African Development Bank and European Union and the European Investment Bank to monitor and advocate for effective implementation of these policies. These policies of the international financial institutions are international good practices. How do these policies and countries' own policy or a sector's own policy compare to the IFI policy? For example, in case of Ghana health sector, there is a health sector project financed by the World Bank that has a stakeholder engagement plan. And the Ministry of Health has a public participation policy. You can compare the two and see whether the ministry's policy, how does it compare with the international practice in the World Bank Stakeholder Engagement Plan. If they are willing to do it for a World Bank finance projects, why don't they apply it to everything they do in Ministry of Health? That is what is meant by strengthening country systems. So we hope that in this program, we can work in a triangular fashion with the communities and civil society sector, engaging with leveraging the stakeholder engagement plans and policies of the World Bank and the IMF and the African Development Bank and others, and compare them to the country systems and work with the government to improve this so that the scarce development financing money can be directed towards the needs of the public and people to serve the people. Time and again, people want the global initiatives call for putting people at the center of everything and put people first. Most recently, you may have heard of the Jubilee Report. The late Pope had commissioned this Jubilee Report 25 years after the first Jubilee movement for debt restructuring and for debt forgiveness. And he asked Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel Prize winner, to lead 30 commissioners from around the world, who is who of the world development community. And they issued a report last month called the Jubilee Report. And that report has called for a second Jubilee movement to start for debt restructuring and debt forgiveness. And this is now in public domain, and they say that anything done under the second Jubilee, this Jubilee effort, should put people first and at the center. So I think this is the right time and to do this thing differently, and that is what is different about the PTF initiative. Traditionally, civil society has done this public participation, and we will be sticking and supporting that, but with a little bit of a twist and difference. And the difference is to leverage the international financial institution policies and to support local organizations. And we are working to develop infrastructure and support systems for that. Now, as I said, we work through you. We don't directly, we can't do anything. We don't do anything. So if you are interested in your country or in some sector to pursue this further, you are most welcome to get in touch with us. Rachel or others will put this contact information, and we will be very happy to work with you and try to see how we can help you make a difference. Where can you get more information? We'll circulate these, but we have links to various information, and we will be happy to help in any way we can. Thank you very much. Over to you, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Vinay, for that presentation, for the clarity of it, for the strength of it, and thank you, Asli, too, for your presentation. What a rich set of presentations.